We need to talk. Second edition's out. Alright, so about 2 weeks ago, Night Models released the second edition of the Batman miniatures game. I did a previous video talking about some of the leaks that they've been giving over the past, I think it was like 3 weeks. They gave just daily sneak peeks on what we can expect and sort of new models and things they're doing. And then, I guess, 2 weeks ago, from when you're seeing this video, they finally released the actual rules themselves for everyone to go over. The cool thing about this is they release it as a free PDF and sort of split the book into two things. So they have one book that is just all the rules for playing the game and, you know, turn sequence and all that stuff. And the other one is just a compendium of all the special rules and abilities that the characters, weapons, and like effects that happen in the game is all in a separate book. Again, the cool thing about this is it's all free off the Night Models website, so if you're worried about having to, I guess, buy new books to replace the ones that we already own, you don't have to do that. Everything is free. And if you like paper, it's easy enough to just take those PDFs to like a printing store. Here in Canada, Staples would probably be the biggest one. And they can print those off for you and then bind them, so you still have your books essentially. Hopefully they do release a print run of these books separate. I do like having sort of an official product, but I do see the benefits of releasing the books in PDF form. This way, if there's any sort of rules tweaks or FAQ changes or things that need to be cleared up, it's so much more easy for them to just go into those files, change up the wording a bit, or, you know, make the changes that they've planned to do, and you don't have to worry about your books being, I guess, no longer valid or not having the correct rules in them, because they can just update those PDFs. Those are the benefits of it. As well, you know, a lot of people like to use their phones or not have to carry a lot of things with them, so it's really nice to have something that's, I guess, portable on your phone. I have it on a tablet because I'm old and I can't see on my phone that well reading rules. And eventually I will I will print these off if they don't release a book, although I'm gonna wait and see, because I'm sure this being sort of the first few weeks or so of the book being out, there might be a few rules things that slip through that maybe they want to change before they do like a final product type thing. But this is a really good way. I'm really excited. The changes aren't too crazy. I guess with that, let's check out sort of the rule book and see how things are in that. Alright, so here it is, the new rule book for Batman. It is released as a PDF from Night Models. One of the things I gotta say about this is kind of cool. They've gone with the white and blue motif that is very similar to the way that DC Comics is now releasing their new Rebirth line of comics, which has like a white and blue sort of border around the cover art. So this, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it's neat that this kind of ties in with that. Just sort of a little fact I thought you guys would find interesting. Again, not too many changes from what I've seen. There are a few, I guess, major changes that I'll outline as we go through this. Although, looks pretty good. Basically, the gameplay is the same as the gist of this. It's more of a, I guess, a 1.5 update than a full-on major change to the game. And if you know how to play from before, then there's not going to be any changes. this first small section just sort of goes over the things you need to play the game and sort of explains things for people who might not be miniatures game players, sort of the meaning of words and, you know, what 1d6 means and all the stuff you'll need to play the game. I assume you guys all know that, so I'll just skip over that pretty quickly. Again, this just talks about volume of models, so the actual physical space they take up on the board isn't just limited to the shape of the model, but it's actually sort of a cylinder from the base of the model up to a certain distance. Again, this just talks about, you know, how to roll dice, how to modify values if you have like a plus or minus to your hits. This goes over the character cards, and it does have the new style, which I don't know if I'm sold on it yet, but whatever works. All the information though is the same. You know, you have your weapons, your special traits listed, and then all your sort of abilities and whatnot. After that, it goes into the sequence of the play, and if you see here, all of it's the same. So you take the lead. Taking the lead is the same, so each player will put in amount of counters into a bag or something equal to half the amount of rounds in a game, so everyone takes the lead at least half of the turns in a game. Of course, certain abilities do modify this depending on who you're playing. Then you raise the plan, and that's where you assign your willpower action counters to your model's abilities, and this just sort of talks about how you assign them and then use those out throughout the game. Again, not a big change from before. Again, then it talks about sort of activation. Passing is still the same. You can only pass no more than twice consecutively in the same round, and then the recount phase where you score your points, heal your models that might be damaged, and then get ready for next turn. Again, it just talks about terrain and stuff and all that. Again, no big changes from before. I guess the first major change in the game is that we have now switched over to inches. So a lot of the values here have been converted over, and for the most part it's basically just a straight up conversion from centimeters to inches and then sort of rounded to the nearest number. So like models can only see a foot. If you look at a tape measure, that's about 30 centimeters, so not a big difference. It's not like exact, but for the most part it's not a big deal. Lights, contact, it just talks about sort of these basic things. Your movement distance is now 4 inches as opposed to 10 centimeters, and spending a movement counter now adds 2 inches of movement to your basic movement. So that's, I guess, one of the first big changes is you no longer roll a dice and then add that many centimeters to your movement. Now it's, if you spend a movement counter, you get an extra 2 inches right off the bat. One of the things to note about this too is there is no more running. Although if you sort of do the math on it, I guess it kind of works out to the same. So before, a run move would double your basic movement distance, but you can only move in a straight line. And then if you wanted to move further, you'd have to spend movement counters. Now, if you spend 2 movement counters, that adds 4 inches of movement, and your basic movement is already 4 inches, so that's basically like doubling your movement. I know, so for the same amount of movement counters, or I guess action counters spent, you still move that distance, but now you're not constrained by moving in a straight line, so you can sort of dodge around, you know, obstacles or other models in the way. And there's other things added to the game, which we'll talk about later on, that really makes things pretty quick. So I don't think this is a huge detriment, and now you're guaranteed to know, you know, the exact distance a model's going to be able to move to make it into contact. I know a lot of people like that sort of random element
by spending movement dice, but having played a few games now, I find that this change is actually pretty solid and allows for, I guess, more tactical play, and you have to sort of plan things out a little bit more than before. This just talks about impaired movement, jumping, and leaping down. Basically, not too much of a difference from what we've seen before. Small obstacles, you don't have to actually climb over them, you can just sort of pass through. Although you do have to still subtract the width of the obstacle. That's kind of nice. It allows less finicky movement shenanigans, or like trying to figure out, you know, how much movement would actually cost to like scale a small hedge or something. Now you can just sort of move through it. Cleans things up, makes things a little quicker. That's sort of a small change, I guess. It does talk about climbing and stuff though, just in case you have to do that. Again, no big changes. From there, we'll go into crouch. That is sort of a different change. So before, crouching would give a +1 bonus to your ping. Now it gives you a +1 bonus to defense against range attacks. I feel that's kind of a better change, I guess. Especially for models with maybe low defense. You know, getting that +1 or to that really helps them out against range attacks. And then for models that are, you know, already high in defense, it makes them almost like unshootable. You know, if you have Batman crouched down behind a car and he gets a +1 bonus to his defense, which is already 5, now your enemies has to hit them on 6s. That's a huge buff. I guess in the same section here, another sort of not big change, but a change nonetheless. Manipulating objects. So I guess the main thing you'd want to manipulate is objectives. You can do that at any point in your activation now. Before, say if I want to manipulate a ammo crate to pick up extra ammo for one of my shooters, he would have had to begin his activation already in base contact with that objective. Now you can just do it at any point during your activation, as long as you have the movement counters to spend. So that's kind of a big change. It's nice. It allows, I guess, more efficient use of your model's activation time, as opposed to like maybe having to force them to stay put for a turn. Now they can sort of run up to an objective if they need it, grab, you know, their Titan dose or an extra ammo, and then next turn be able to just like peace out. Again, that's kind of a small thing though. Attacking, no major changes here. You still spend attack counters to attack a character. You need to roll equal to or greater than their defense value. A 1 is always a critical miss, or a 1 is always a miss, and a 6 is always a success to hit, no matter what the defense value is. So there's critical fails and critical successes now with that, which is you know, nice to see. It tells you about how you use your weapons. Nothing major from there. Blocking stays the same, although a 1 will always be a fail when blocking, and a 6 will always be a success. Again, critical failures and success. Nice to have there. This talks about the grab action, because there are a few special close combat actions. Not too different from before. Pushing has a small change in that if you want to do a push action, it has to be with an unarmed attack. So I think before you were able to use your weapons, but now it has to be unarmed. It still does damage and it still pushes a model back, but before it was you were pushed back the distance in centimeters on whatever your collateral dice roll was. Now it's the same, but in inches, rounded down, or whatever your collateral roll is, they're pushed back that in inches, cut in half. So say I rolled a 4 on my collateral dice, they're pushed back 2 inches instead, so just half of whatever it is. Shooting remains basically the same for the most part. You still spend 2 action counters to make a ranged attack, and then you use whatever the rate of fire of your weapon is. If you move before you decide to shoot, then your rate of fire drops to 1. Here's where a big change though happened, is with the pings. So now, no matter how many objects are intervening in the way, you only get one ping. But that ping is a 4+. And I think that's a nice way to clean up the ping rule. I found before there was a lot of arguments, or I guess not arguments, but like disagreements on maybe what object should give what level of ping. Now there's only one level. It's a 4+. You only get one. It's just a nice cleaning up, makes things go quicker. Another change with shooting is before a model had to be outside of 5 centimeters of an enemy model to be able to use their range attack weapons. Now they can use them at any distance as long as they're not in base contact with an enemy model. So this gives, shooters a little bit more, viability in the game, and it gives them more options to be, contributing to the overall gameplay of your crew. And I think you're going to see with that change a lot more maybe characters that had like short range weapons and stuff that maybe weren't used as much because they had to be so close to the enemy anyway to be effective that it just wasn't worth it because they'd always get blocked out from shooting. Now I think you're going to see a lot of handguns and short range weapons making a comeback in the game because now they can still be super close to the opponent, just they can't be in base contact anymore to shoot. So another, I think that'll be sort of like a stealth big thing that people won't catch on to so much at first, but having played a bunch of games with dudes with pistols, they were doing way better than I would have thought if I was just based on what I knew from the previous game, rules wise. That makes sense. Maybe I'm wrong. I just thought my pistols were rocking. Anyways, other than that, damaging is essentially the same. You still take just the scratches, so if you hit an enemy model with a range attack weapon but fail to damage them, you take a stun. And unarmed damage is always just one stun marker. You still lose willpower, action counter generation for every 2 damage you take, so that's another one. Coup de grace is still in the game. Again, there's most of the changes in the game come from the actual special rules compendium and not so much of this section. There are a few tweaks and stuff in the main rules, but if you know how to play first edition Batman, you know how to play second edition Batman. Like, there's not a huge change. The biggest thing is the change from inches to centimeters, centimeters to inches. But once you just sort of look over like all the differences, it's basically the same game at the core. Speed Force had some tweaks, so you still have 10 counters for the Speed Force pool, and players alternate drawing from it depending on if they have speedsters or not. I guess one of the bigger changes to this, though, and I think is what's gonna make us see more speedsters in the game, is that before you were limited to only using 1 power per turn. Now you can use any amount of powers as long as you have the speed power counters to reflect that. You just can't use the same power twice. So that's nice, and I think you're gonna see like people bringing out speedsters just to do it, like a few combos here and there. The paradox table is still there, which we'll look at now. It is a little less punishing as before, although on a double one your model still gets killed as a casualty, and on a 12 the Black Flash still shows up and for your opponent and does some shenanigans. One thing they did add though to the game here is if a speedster has no action counters remaining, and by action counters I kind of think they mean speed power counters, although maybe they do mean action counters, it suffers -1 to its movement and defense basic skills, so I guess they get tired out. Other than that, it talks about how to make a crew and sort of buying funding. They did change one thing with leaders, so they still have the Inspire trait, but they also have another thing where friendly henchmen within 4 inches of them can use Let's Go without spending a special counter. That's kind of a big deal for some crews who need to sort of chain activations to get some work done. And it is something to note and I guess look out for is, people who do use Let's Go a lot, they're probably going to be trying to take advantage of that rule because it is a nice little change, and I think you're going to see Let's Go happening more. I know a lot of people used to, at least in my area, don't use it as much because it was sort of a confusing thing to do, and you'd always have, it was never guaranteed that you'd actually get the Let's Go roll off. So being able to actually just do it while being close to your leader is kind of nice. I guess one thing to note here too is they changed all the the ranks to symbols on the cards. I don't know why, but whatever. I guess it looks neat. But nothing really major there. And then they have all the equipment lists for each individual crew. You'll notice some have been changed, the names, although we'll talk about that in a few seconds. There are a few new items that I noticed, or maybe I just didn't realize them from before. But the nice thing about these equipment lists is it compiles all the lists from first edition's main rulebook, the Flash and Arrow expansion, and the campaign book. Now it's all in one place, and anyone who maybe didn't pick up one of those books in the past now has access to all the equipment lists here. And I think that's just nice for players, and it's kind of fun to read through and see what other crews can get. Again, I'm not gonna look for it now, but I did notice like one or two maybe new equipment items out there. I think a lot of it has to do with these folks, the Gotham City Sirens, but I guess we'll talk about that again in a few seconds. So scenarios and like sort of your pre-game sequence remains the same. So you pick your scenario, you put down your lampposts and sewers, you put down your crews, then objectives, and then you start playing. Now there are a few changes here that I want to note. So before you'd roll a D3 to generate how many sewer markers and lampposts that you put out, now you just get 3 right off the bat for each, so that's pretty interesting. There's a big change though here with sewers. So it's still a move and a special to get in a sewer, but instead of spending a full turn in a sewer before you can get out, now you actually instantly are removed from the board and then put anywhere in base contact with another sewer marker on the board. So basically it's like a one-time teleportation. Now only one model per crew can do this, and once they are placed at the new location, their activation immediately ends. So for example, I have, I don't know, what am I looking at here? Pipe Prisoner, he goes up to a sewer, spends the move and a special to go in the sewer. So I take him off the board and then immediately place him in base contact with another sewer marker anywhere on the board, and then his activation ends. At first I thought this was kind of stupid because it's basically like an instant teleportation. But actually having used this in game, it really quickens things up and it makes sewers more, I guess, important to worry about, placement of the sewers and, how your opponent might want to use to their advantage or you use it to yours. And it just makes things a hell of a lot quicker in game. And you're able to move models across the board at a faster pace. Another thing I can see that's good about this new way of using sewers is placing sewers on top of buildings or in spots where maybe models with backclaws are going to go. Now those models aren't as safe up on a building because you have a way to get up and close to them. And yeah, I just dig the rule in general as a whole. Again, I guess it seems kind of wonky because you immediately teleport, but actually having played with this rule, it adds a whole new level of like tactical depth to sewer placement, whereas before, unless you're using someone like Killer Croc who has abilities to use sewers, you know, a lot of times back then, or I guess for first edition, players would just kind of put sewers out randomly and not really worry about it because they knew neither themselves or their opponent were actually going to use those sewers. Now you actually have to think about placement of sewers and sort of see what your opponent's doing, because it does make a big difference when some of those models can just shoot across the board super quickly or get in like your opponent's backfield, turn 1 or 2. Lampposts, again, you get 3 off the bat, and they have a 4-inch radius of illumination. If you do the math, it's basically 10 centimeters, so exactly the same as before. Objectives are the same, although we do have some new ones, which is kind of cool to see. So we have medical supplies, which gives out a narcotics dose, which we'll look at in the trait book. LexCorp's high technology thing, and that gives sort of like a little bonus to a 1 round bonus to characters that use the high-tech gadget that they can pick up off of that. Ace Chemical, same deal. And fire drums, again, if you want to see exactly what they do, pick up the book. It is free to download, but it is nice to see them actually like changing things and adding them to the game. Finally, it talks about casualties and stuff. No changes there. Here is sort of one of the big changes of this edition too, and it's in this list here. So, the Batman, Green Arrow, and Law Force's crew have all been rolled into one crew called the Brave and the Bold. And the other one that got rolled together was Organized Crime, Two-Face, Black Mask, LexCorp, Wonderland Game. They're now all under the banner of Organized Crime. So what that means is any models in those crews can work together in one crew. So essentially they've all been rolled into one. I like it because it a couple have been renamed. So Poison Ivy is now Gotham City Sirens. League of Shadows is now League of Assassins. I guess the rest are all the same. Like Organized Crime, Two-Face, Black Mask, and LexCorp, basically the same crew in the books and everything. They're all just sort of like mafia dudes. Wonderland does seem a little tacked on there, but I don't know. I'm not going to sweat bullets too much about it. And then, Batman, Green Arrow, and Law Forces. The majority of those crews shared the same henchmen and free agents anyway, so it just kind of made sense to just roll it all together, and does add different ways to sort of configure those crews and maybe opens up some options for other players. And it cleans up the list because now, they just cut essentially like 5 or 6 separate crews that they had to worry about releases for now, and put them into, a nice small number. I'm sure they'll eventually start tacking on new crews eventually, but this sort of cleans things up a bit and means that, a release for Two-Face is now actually a release for anyone who played all those crews before, and allows them to sort of mix and match, which is nice. I guess the final thing to look at, though, is the scenarios. They're all the same as before. They haven't updated the Bat Match rule pack yet, which had a lot of new scenarios in it for like tournament play, but I'm sure that's coming in the pipeline. Other than that, though, like I said many times during this, it's basically the same game at heart. The only major change is from centimeters to inches. But if you knew how to play, Batman for first edition, you know how to play Batman for second edition. Again, it's more like small tweaks here and there and cleaning up of wording and stuff. Nothing too major happened change-wise, except for sewers and maybe shooters being able to shoot within 5 centimeters of enemy models. But I guess with that, let's check out the Special Rules Compendium, because that's where I think the majority of changes have happened. And I'm not going to go through all of them there, but I will, I guess highlight a few that stuck out to me. Sort of a big deal. So, we'll check that out now. Alright, so here's the second book in the two that were released by Night Models. Now, this one just contains all the special rules that go with each character, which is a nice addition, and it's cool that they have it's separate from the actual main rulebook. Again, I think this will just help them out if they ever have to update certain things. They can just do like one book or the other and not affect the whole PDF. Again, I'm hoping they release this eventually as like a printed book, but that remains to be seen. And if we are stuck with this, it's not too hard to just take the whole thing out and get it printed at like a printing shop. So anyways, this just explains how traits work and stuff. Nothing too crazy here. I'm not going to go through every single trait, because it's basically every single trait that was ever released for the game, plus a few new ones. So I'm just going to highlight a couple. Like, I really suggest people go themselves and read this book. This is where the majority, I guess, of changes for second edition Batman are coming in, is tweaks and stuff to these traits. I guess the first one to highlight though would be Acrobat here. Basically still the god ability. So it gets +1 with its basic movement distance, so it still moves a little bit faster. It doesn't treat jumping as impaired movement, which is kind of crazy. The model does not spend any movement counters to jump up or get up after being knocked down, so that's the same as before. They can move through other models, so they got this ability back. In first edition, it was FAQ'd that they weren't able to move through models. Now they can again, so this makes them really mobile on the table. And they still retain dodging for range attacks. Some other things to note is like the Amazon rules and all the legend stuff that they introduce with Superman, Wonder Woman, and not the dynamic duo, the one list that is essentially just Batman and Superman. So all those are included in here too, which is nice to see and nice to have everything just in one spot where you could reference it fairly easily. I guess another one to highlight on this one would be Bat Armor Mark II. So it's still, you ignore damage on a 6+, so it's like a 6+ saving throw. But now that model gets a +1 to their basic movement. So that's, I guess the main one that has that would be Christian Bale Batman with his, he already has movement 3, and then having a +1 to his basic movement makes him really mobile and kind of makes sense. Another one though too is Bat Armor Mark III. If this model has moved during its activation, it can attack enemy models within 2 inches away. So that's pretty crazy. It gives I think just Rebirth Batman has Bat Armor 3. Is there someone else? I don't remember. Doesn't matter. 2 inches is actually huge. So before reach in the reach ability for weapons in first edition was 3 centimeters. I believe reach was also changed to 2 inches, although we'll get to that eventually, just to double check. That's a huge distance. Like, let me just grab a ruler. So 2 inches is almost like 8 centimeters, 6 centimeters. So that's a huge buff to what I guess we're used to, and it's gonna be able to allow, I guess, these guys with Bat Armor Mark III, or if reach is the same, which I believe it is, to take part a lot more in the game, and their positioning is not as important now. I guess it's more forgiving on where you position them, and that's really nice. I guess one of the big ones too on this page is the change to Bat Claw. So now what it does, it just adds +8 to your basic movement. And it can change direction vertically and stuff, so you can move. It's essentially the same. Like, I think me and someone else did the math. 8 plus your basic movement of 4 is 12 centimeters, and that works, or 12 inches, and that works out to exactly 30 centimeters almost, so it's the same. The big difference here, though, is you can't use it on 2 consecutive turns. So if you backclaw 1 turn, you have to wait a whole turn before you can actually use that again. It does take away a lot of the mobility of people with backclaws, but at the same time, you're not restricted to just moving in a straight line, and you can also use that plus 8 to your movement to just move along the ground if that's where you started. So, I mean, it has nice tweaks to it, and then it has like a bit of a downside as well. So you kind of like have to think ahead of what you want your backclaw models to do if they are going up onto buildings and stuff where they might not be able to get down. You need to have sort of like a set game plan in mind when you use this ability now. Again, like some of these do stay the same. You know, Brutal's the same. Business Agent's essentially the same. A lot of this stuff remains the same, but again, this is where all the main changes come from in the game. And this video would be like 4 hours if I just go through every single one of them, so I'm actually going to skip most of these abilities. I guess I'll highlight fast though. I guess people might be wondering what the change would be now because you don't roll for your movement dice when you spend them. So now fast models just get +2 to their basic movement, which is crazy if you consider, who is it? Classic Harley, I believe, is fast and acrobat, so she actually gets +3 to her basic movement just off the get-go. So that's pretty solid for her. Like, she was quick before, she's even quicker now, even without spending those movement dice, because her basic movement would be 7 inches, which is pretty damn far. There is one, yeah. So, I believe in Harvey Dent is one we haven't seen before. And it's a good, I guess, insight into maybe what Night Miles is planning. So they are going to be bringing out, hopefully, releases for Two-Face, because that's a Two-Face specific rule. And it's good to see that some of these crews that maybe haven't had very much love lately, like Two-Face's crew, they're still thinking about them, and they still have, I guess, plans for the future with that. There is a new one that was released for Joker's Gas. So that's an ability that the new Arkham Asylum Joker, the first resin Joker, has, and all models within 4 inches of him must pass an endurance roll or suffer enervating 1 and 1 blood damage. So that's a really good ability for him. He can sort of rush out in front of his crew, and if you know your opponent has a bunch of guys all grouped up, he can pop this gas off and then not only give them each a blood damage if they fail their endurance roll, although if it's low endurance, henchmen, good chance it's going to get off. And then not only that, but it's also dropping an action counter off those models as well. So really good utility ability. Does a bit of damage, but it also screws over your opponent's activation dice or counters. There is a new one that was released for, I guess we'll talk about Lord of Sewers, because this is a big one now with the changes to sewers. I believe only Killer Croc has this one at the moment, but now he can he doesn't count towards the maximum number of models that can enter sewers during a round, which is 1, but now it could be 1 plus him. This model may start the game in contact with a sewer. In addition, this model's crew generates 1 extra sewer marker. So whoever controls him will have 4 sewers to play with, and they can start Croc next to any sewer on the board at the beginning of the game, which is super crazy because you know, not many models have an ability to get up the board, only like hidden models. But you could plan it where, you know, you have 4 sewers now, so you can put them where you need to, and maybe have one set aside for like a special spot for where, you know, Croc will be. And just know, like, have a plan for him, which is way better than before, where he can start in the sewer, but you'd still have to wait that full turn, so it wouldn't come on until turn 2. Now you can have him in your opponent's backfield or sort of mid-range, already causing havoc turn 1. The pause there was me trying to see when he's actually deployed, and it looks like he starts the game like that. So I guess starting the game would be right as you take the lead the first time, so he'd be placed after everything, so you can probably see. Don't quote me on that, I might have to double check the wording, but I believe that's when he would actually be placed, so that's pretty solid. Sorry, I'm fighting a cold here. There was a new one released for Bane, which is with the new resin version of him. So I'm just gonna sort of jump through a bunch of these quick just to find it. Again, you know, World's Greatest Detective was one released with The World's Finest, that was it, with the Superman and Batman pack. So again, you know, any special rule that's ever been released ever for Batman is all in this book, which is really nice. And again, it's free off the Night Models website. I think I skipped it. Something like I Will Break You. It's a good one for the new Bane. Yeah, here we go. I Will Break You. So when you hire this model, choose one of the next options. Bane gets +3 extra venom doses. That's pretty crazy. So you can almost rock them every turn. Or he gets Exhaustive Planner and +1 to his willpower. And I believe he's already willpower like 8. So having a willpower 9 Bane on the crew is pretty crazy. And then he gains, or he can gain Close Combat Master. So depending on what, like, I guess your opponent brings, you can tailor that Bane to, I guess, deal with him a little bit better. I believe that Bane also has invulnerability when he uses venom doses, so, you know, that's a good way to keep him alive, or adding the willpower. Like, it's a really cool ability, and there isn't too many others like that, which is kind of disappointing. It would be nice to see maybe like other crews have an ability like this, where if you take your leader, you have like a list of sort of extra bonuses and buffs you can give that one character. Although I guess we are seeing more of the equipment lists actually being just for leaders as opposed to just for henchmen, so I guess that evens out in the end there. Some of the special attacks are mostly the same. One of the big ones changed was Technique. They made Technique pretty damn awesome now, if I had to judge it. So it's still one special, and when you activate all your close combat attacks gain the Technique ability or whatever. And if you damage a non-vehicle enemy in close combat, the damaged model suffers the paralyzed effect. So paralyzed is it's the same as before, I believe. Yeah, so it reduces his defense skill by 2, and he cannot spend action counters of any kind for any reason. That's pretty damn huge. Considering Technique is, I think most crews have access to it. Maybe not, I was going to say Brave and the Bold, but they do because they have Damian Wayne. It makes a lot of these characters who have it, who maybe weren't seeing a lot of play, like Damian Wayne or Arkham City Harley Quinn, you know, their choices now you got to think about. Like, that's a really powerful ability, and if you can pull it off on something, it really leaves the model that gets paralyzed wide open to just get taken out. And that could be big characters too, like Batman or Deathstroke. Yeah, most of these remain the same. Beam still wounds on a 2+, and takes 2 off the ping roll, which sucks. But now it doesn't automatically ignore pings, because ping is always a 4 now, and -2 to that will be a 6. But there's critical success for ping rolls now, so 6 is always work regardless of what the modifier is to that roll. So that's kind of nice to see. Most of these are the same again. Like, I'm not gonna go through everything for you, but let's double check reach. Yeah, so reach is 2 inches away, so you know, a big buff for those models. Again, I guess I'm gonna reference a Joker crew model with it, because I have the Joker crew, so I know them a little bit better than the other crews. But like Classic Harley and Mr. Hammer both have reach. Being able to reach like 2 inches away is pretty solid, especially with the weapons they have. Push was changed a bit. I think it's on this page. Anyways, her push is now it's half of whatever your collateral dice is. So, you know, her weapon's still good for pushing. A lot of the effects remain the same. Nothing too crazy. They sort of clear up, I guess, what you expect to smoke. So a lot of people weren't sure what the space was taken, but it's a template with infinite height. So it's basically a huge cylinder up the board, or up into space from wherever the template's placed. But for the most part, it stays the same. Nothing too crazy changed in these areas. Again, this is more of like I guess a softer reboot. And then all the strategies are in here, so if you do choose to play with strategies, because it is still an optional rule, although I think most people do, they're all in here. Again, a few tweaks here and there. And the nice thing about these lists is, again, it has everything from the old main rulebook plus the Flash and Arrow expansion, so you have access to all those I guess character specific strategies. Now, some of these were rolled into other crews, and people were having confusion on, you know, what that meant. So Batman is part of the Brave and the Bold crew, but he still has his own thing. So what they explained was, if you have Batman in your crew, then you can take the Batman strategy. That's all that means. So even though he's part of the Brave and the Bold, you can still take this as long as you have Batman in the crew. Same with like Mad Hatter, who's now part of organized crime. Again, not too much to say about this. A lot of the changes are here, but for the most part, there's nothing too drastically different. And again, I like, if you plan to pick up the new game, or I guess start the new rules, this is where I guess you want to focus a lot of your reading on, just to see what changes happen to maybe the crews you run. I know I ran Bane at a event last weekend, and I had to like go through all the cards I had and then like double check and make sure there weren't too many drastic changes, and there weren't. But again, it was good to just reference that and make sure, you know, maybe something you thought worked a certain way in first edition, there's a good chance it might work differently in this edition. And it's always nice to have this, especially as just a, you know, a reference, because I found, like, playing at least in first edition, anytime we went to the rulebook, it was always just to see what a certain special ability that we might not use all the time does. So it's nice having the two books separate, and this is a more, like, if you have this on your phone, it's a more concise, smaller area to search through than having to search through the whole rulebook. Or if, like me, you plan to print these out for yourself, so you have physical copies, you'll know exactly sort of at least the general book where it's in, and it's a lot easier to go through than just, you know, one huge like killer tome of like just rules. So I guess with that, we'll call it an end here. Again, I highly suggest people check this out. Having played a few games with this, it's just really fun with the rules, and I guess I'll do my outro. So
there you have it. Those are the new rules. Not much else to say other than, I recommend you guys just taking the time to read them yourselves. It really is a pretty nice, solid update for the Batman Miniatures game. And, there's a lot there and a lot of subtle changes that you kind of have to be looking for when you do this, or when you do read it. So, just take the time to read the rules. But if you know how to play the old game, or I guess first edition, you know how to play this game. I've said it before. Again, I'm really happy with this, and I can't wait to start doing some more bat reps and reviews again, highlighting these new rules. So with that, thanks for watching. If you want to keep up to date on what myself and the other members of Canham are up to, always check us out on Facebook, our individual Twitters, and shared Instagram accounts. Also want to thank Multizone in Gatineau, who sponsors the Batman side of the videos. And with that, I guess we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.